stop explaining themselves. A quiet yet thunderous shift occurs within the hidden architecture of the psyche. You see, the compulsion to explain is never merely a social courtesy. It is a survival mechanism deeply embedded in the wounds of the sensitive soul. The empath believes, often unconsciously, that if only they can make themselves understood, if only they can pour their essence into words clear enough, the world will finally grant them permission to exist without conflict. But this need to explain is a trap laid by the shadow, for it is not about clarity at all. It is about bondage. To explain is to remain chained to the other's gaze, to live not from one's own center, but from the projected demands of the external. And it is here that the narcissist thrives, feeding not upon truth, but upon the endless river of justifications, rationalizations, and apologies that the empath bleeds out like lifeblood. I tell you, the dance between empath and narcissist is one of the most profound archetypal encounters in our modern age, for it embodies the ancient struggle between the soul that feels too much and the soul that feels too little. One overflows with sensitivity, the other starves on its absence. One dissolves in explanation, the other grows bloated with power. But let us look deeper, beyond the interpersonal theater, into the archetypal underworld, where these patterns are forged, for it is there, in the shadows of the collective unconscious, that we encounter the true reason why explaining weakens the empath and empowers the narcissist. In the symbolic language of dreams, to explain oneself is often akin to standing naked before a faceless judge. Have you not felt it? That sense of standing trial, where your worth depends on whether the other believes you? This is the dream the empath lives in waking life. It is the dream of a child before the stern father, or the indifferent mother, whispering, "Please, if you only understand me, you will not abandon me." The narcissist, on the other hand, carries the opposite dream. If I never need to explain myself, if I can demand instead of justify, then I will never be abandoned. Do you see how perfectly they fit? One archetype longs to be heard, the other refuses to listen. One bleeds meaning into the void, the other swallows it without digestion. It is a ritual of possession, and the narcissist holds power only so long as the empath speaks words that surrender their autonomy. The moment the empath ceases to explain, the ritual collapses. The narcissist is left staring into silence, and silence is the one mirror they cannot endure. For in silence, their control dissolves. They can manipulate words, twist arguments, explore apology, but they cannot twist the void. The void reflects their own hollowness back at them, and they recoil. And here lies the archetypal reversal. The empath's refusal to explain is not weakness, but initiation. It is the first act of reclaiming the self from the mouth of the devourer. But let me take you even further, into the symbolic anatomy of the psyche. When an empath explains, they descend into the realm of logos, the rational principle, trying to weave language that will bridge the abyss between their inner truth and the other's perception. Yet when this logos is enslaved to the other, it becomes a weapon turned inward, draining the empath of vitality. The narcissist, lacking connection to the eros of genuine relatedness, hungers for logos as a substitute for intimacy. Thus, your explanations become their feast. But when you stop explaining, if you withdraw logos back into your own center, you realign it with eros. You speak not to justify, but to declare. You exist not to persuade, but to embody. And that embodiment is power. Consider the archetype of the martyr, endlessly pleading before an unyielding authority. That martyr believes that suffering and explanation will win redemption, but the true transformation does not come through endless self-disclosure. It comes through silence, through withdrawal, through recognition that one's worth is not determined by the tribunal of the other. This is the death of the old self, the self that begged to be understood, and it is the birth of the new self, the one who knows that understanding begins within. Do you see how this ties to the shadow? For the empath, the shadow often holds the archetype of the abandoned child. This child whispers, "If I do not explain, I will be misunderstood, and if I am misunderstood, I will be unloved." Every explanation is an offering to that fear. But when you cease explaining, you confront that shadow child. You embrace it and say, "Even if I am misunderstood, I remain." This is the alchemy of individuation. The movement from dependence upon external validation to the fiery core of inner sovereignty. The narcissist, then, is the unwitting midwife of this transformation. For without their demands for endless explanation, you might never see the futility of the ritual. Their hunger forces you to awaken. And so, the loss of narcissistic power is not a punishment you inflict. It is a natural consequence of individuation. For the narcissist, power never existed in themselves. It was borrowed from your surrender. The river dried because you stopped pouring. They are left parched, bewildered and afraid, but you are left in silence. And silence is not emptiness, it is the womb of rebirth. In dreams, the cessation of explanation often takes the form of losing one's voice or standing in a crowd unable to speak. Many fear such dreams as nightmares, but they carry a hidden gift. They say, now that the tongue is silenced, the self may speak, for the true voice does not emerge in the clamor of justification, but in the depths of presence. You may recall how often those who carry great spiritual authority speak less, not more. Their silence is not absence, it is weight. It is the gravity of being aligned with their own depths. The empath who stops explaining touches the same gravity, and it is here that the narcissist trembles. For power cannot control what it cannot define. Let me give you an image. Imagine a dream where you are walking through a forest at night, carrying a lantern. Every time someone challenges you, you thrust the lantern forward, crying, "Look, here is my light. Please see it." But in doing so, you burn the oil too quickly, and soon you are left in darkness. The narcissist thrives in this darkness, mocking your exhaustion. But what if, instead, you held the lantern close, conserving the oil, allowing the light to warm you rather than prove itself to others? Then, when the narcissist demands, "Show me your light," you simply remain in silence, glowing quietly. They cannot touch this. They cannot consume it, for the light is no longer external performance, but inner possession. This is the archetypal shift of power. And yes, there will be fear in this transformation. To stop explaining is to die to an old identity. The identity that believed it survived by appeasing others. You may feel as if silence will cause abandonment, but remember, the ones who abandon you because you cease explaining were never holding you. They were holding the illusion of your servitude. When you withdraw that illusion, they reveal their true faces, and you reveal yours. In this way, the empath-narcissist dynamic becomes an initiation rite. It forces the empath to encounter their shadow, to integrate the abandoned child, to reclaim their logos and eros, and to embody the self. And when this happens, the narcissist loses power, not because you defeated them, but because there is nothing left for them to feed on. Their hunger remains, but the feast is gone. You walk away with your lantern, your oil intact, your silence humming with the voice of eternity. When you look closely, you will see that the compulsion to explain oneself is not born in adulthood. It is rooted in the earliest archetypal encounters between the child and the parent. The infant does not yet have words, but infant senses when the caregiver turns away, when love is conditional, when presence depends on compliance. This wound does not speak in sentences. It speaks in silence, in the felt terror that I will not be held if I am not understood. And as the child grows, words become the substitute for the primal cry. To explain oneself becomes the modern form of that cry. But what is tragic is that just as the infant's cry could not always summon the mother, the empath's explanations cannot summon love. Instead, they attract those who feed on need, the archetypal devourers of the soul. The narcissist is not simply a manipulative personality. The narcissist is an archetype that emerges where the collective shadow refuses to nurture. They are born from the absence of eros. And so, when the empath explains, they pour water into a vessel with no bottom. It is not understanding that the narcissist seeks, but the ongoing performance of dependence. To stop explaining, then, is not merely to break a bad habit. It is to break a primal contract with abandonment itself. You must understand this. To cease explaining is to risk the return of the ancient terror of not being held, not being loved, not being seen. That is why it feels so unbearable. That is why silence trembles like death in the throat of the empath. But this trembling is the doorway to transformation. The self does not emerge through safety. It emerges through confrontation with the abyss. And the abyss whispers, even if no one understands you, you remain. This whisper is the seed of true freedom. Do not mistake me here. To stop explaining does not mean to cease communication. It is not a call to repression or withdrawal into bitterness. It is the shift from communication as self-justification to communication as self-expression. When you no longer explain to earn permission, you begin to speak from the deep well of being itself. Your words cease to be currency for acceptance and become symbols of inner alignment. The narcissist cannot touch such words because they are not offered as food. They are like sacred runes inscribed upon stone, emanating meaning without begging to be received. To the narcissist, these words are unbearable because they carry weight that does not bend. To the empath, they are liberation. Let us descend into another symbol, the courtroom. Imagine the dream in which you stand before a judge, accused of something undefined. You plead your case endlessly, but the judge never renders a verdict. This dream recurs in the psyche of the empath because their life is lived in this courtroom. Every explanation is another futile plea before a faceless authority. But notice what happens if, in the dream, you suddenly stop speaking. The silence deepens, the judge fidgets, the power reverses. For the judge's authority existed only so long as you agreed to stand trial. The moment you refuse the trial, the court dissolves. This is the hidden key. The The narcissist's power is not sovereign, it is parasitic. It depends entirely on your participation in the trial. Withdraw, and they are revealed as hollow. Now, from a Jungian perspective, this drama mirrors the archetype of the trickster. The narcissist is a trickster figure, not in the playful sense, but in the devouring, destabilizing sense. The trickster thrives on confusion, on the spinning of words into webs that ensnare. The empath, by explaining, becomes caught in this web. But like every trickster, the narcissist serves an unconscious purpose. To force the awakening of discernment, the empath must eventually see that no explanation will ever suffice, and in this recognition, the spell breaks. What felt like defeat becomes initiation. The trickster is outwitted not by argument, but by refusal to play the game, and thus the narcissist loses power the moment the empath withdraws from the web of explanations. This refusal is not easy, because the empath carries within them the archetype of the healer, and the healer believes that if only they explain enough, if only they share enough light, they will mend the rift in the other. The narcissist becomes a wound. The empath tries to heal by pouring their soul into words, but the healer, untransformed, does not yet realize that some wounds are abysses, not vessels. You cannot pour enough water into a hole that has no bottom. The transformation of the healer archetype is to realize that healing begins not in the other, but in oneself. The moment the empath recognizes that explaining is not healing, but self-wounding, they begin to transmute the healer archetype into the sovereign. They reclaim their medicine not as sacrifice, but as embodiment. And here is a paradox worth contemplating. The narcissist fears silence because silence mirrors their emptiness, but the empath fears silence because silence mirrors their abandonment. Both fear silence, but for opposite reasons, and yet silence is precisely what liberates both if they can endure it. The narcissist is forced to confront their hollowness. The empath is forced to confront their fear of being unloved. In this way, silence becomes alchemy. It destroys the illusion of the bond, but it forges the reality of individuation. And in this crucible, the empath discovers that their essence does not vanish when it is not explained. It shines more brightly, precisely because it is no longer diluted. Think of the dream of the voice. Many empaths dream of speaking, but no sound comes out, or of screaming into an unhearing void. These are not simply nightmares of helplessness, they are symbolic rehearsals for the deeper truth, that the true voice does not exist to be heard by others. The true voice exists to be aligned with the self. Whether others hear it or not is secondary. And when the empath finally stops explaining, they step into the silence where this true voice emerges, not loud, not desperate, but resonant. It is not a trumpet in the marketplace, it is the low hum of a mountain that does not move. This resonance terrifies the narcissist, for it cannot be manipulated, and it strengthens the empath, for it roots them in eternity. There is also something profoundly eschatological in this moment. When you stop explaining, it is as though a small apocalypse unfolds. The world that depended on your compliance begins to crumble. Certain relationships may collapse. Certain structures of identity may dissolve. The narcissist may rage, accuse, withdraw, or attempt to re-entrap you. This chaos is not a sign of failure, but of liberation. Individuation always requires apocalypse. For the old order must die for the self to be born. And though the narcissist may scream louder in your silence, that scream is only the death rattle of the control they once held. Your silence is not passive, it is apocalyptic fire. Let us not forget the archetype of the shadow in all this. The empath, by ceasing to explain, is forced to face the shadow of their own desire for control. For to explain endlessly is also to attempt control of how others see you, control of whether you are loved. This shadow must be faced. It is not enough to demonize the narcissist. One must also see the narcissist within oneself, that part which hungers for the other's approval, that part which fears being misunderstood, that part which would rather twist in endless justification than risk abandonment. This is your own inner narcissist, inverted and hidden. By ceasing to explain, you confront this shadow directly. You say, I release the need to control your perception of me. And in that release, you step into freedom. Now, some may ask, does this mean that the empath must forever remain silent? Forever refuse to explain? No. It means that explanation must be transmuted. When you explain not from compulsion, but from sovereignty, it becomes teaching, not pleading. It becomes declaration, not justification. In this form, words regain their sacred power. They no longer drain, they create. They no longer beg, they command. And the narcissist, faced with this transmuted logos, flees. For such words carry a force they cannot consume. This is why true teachers, true mystics, true healers speak few words but with immense gravity. They are not explaining themselves to you, they are revealing themselves through you. That is the destiny of the empath, who ceases to explain to become a vessel of revelation. And so we return to the theme. When the empath stops explaining, the narcissist loses power. But let us reframe this in Jungian language. When the wounded child within ceases to cry out for parental validation, the shadow projection collapses. The narcissist is revealed not as an omnipotent force, but as a brittle shell, and the empath, no longer bound by the need to justify existence, steps into the self. This is the initiation, the rebirth, the individuation. It is not merely psychological, it is alchemical. It transforms the lead of suffering into the gold of sovereignty. And it is the destiny of every empath who survives the fire of the narcissist to discover this gold. There is a deeper secret in the empath's surrender of explanation. It is not only a personal liberation, it is a collective healing. For every time you refuse to justify your existence, you break a chain in the ancestral line. Generations before you carried this burden, women silenced under patriarchal judgment, children pleading before stern and indifferent fathers, the meek begging before the powerful for mercy. They explained themselves endlessly, hoping to be spared. Their voices echo in your throat when you try to explain why you are who you are. And when you stop, when you draw the line of silence, you are not only saving yourself, you are ending the ancestral ritual of pleading. You become the one who says, the trial ends here, and though it feels like a small act, it ripples backward and forward in time, healing those who came before and empowering those who will come after. Such is the nature of archetypal work. Your personal shift is never only yours, It belongs to the collective soul. Think of the dream where you inherit a book written by ancestors, filled with explanations for their suffering. Each page contains apologies, justifications, confessions of why they were misunderstood. And in the dream, the book is heavy, unbearably heavy, because it carries the shame of centuries. You carry this book too, even if you do not consciously know it. And every time you explain yourself, you write another line in that book, but the moment you close it, the book dissolves into dust, and in its place appears a new symbol, a key forged in silence. This key unlocks a door in the psyche, a door that opens not to the judge, not to the devourer, but to the sanctuary of the self. There, you find that you were never on trial. The court was always an illusion. You were always free. But freedom is frightening to the uninitiated, the empath. When they first stop explaining, often feels guilt. Guilt is the ghost of the old contract, whispering, you are cruel for not justifying. You are selfish for not appeasing. You are arrogant for not bowing. These are not the voice of the self. They are the echoes of the internalized narcissist. Every empath carries within them a narcissistic phantom, a shadow parent who demands the endless trial continue. When you stop explaining, this phantom rises louder than ever. It says, if you do not explain, they will hate you. If you do not explain, they will leave you. If you do not explain, you will be nothing. This is the dragon at the gate of individuation. And the empath, trembling, must face it with silence. Silence, then, is the sword. Not silence as repression, not silence as avoidance, but silence as presence. When the inner phantom demands explanation, silence cuts through the illusion. When the narcissist outside demands justification, silence exposes their hunger. The dragon roars, but finds no fuel. And in that emptiness, it starves. This is the mystery. What feels like weakness refusing to justify is in fact the most potent weapon, for it withdraws the very substance upon which the adversary feeds. Consider the myth of Persephone. She was taken into the underworld, consumed by Hades, forced into the role of the devoured. Many interpret her story as one of helplessness, but remember, Persephone eventually becomes queen of the underworld. Her power does not come from explaining her abduction, from pleading with Hades to release her, from justifying her existence. Her power comes from her silence, her acceptance of the underworld as part of her own domain. The empath is Persephone, dragged into the underworld of narcissistic control. They begin by pleading, by explaining, but eventually, in silence, they become queen of that underworld, so verein in shadow. The narcissist loses power, not because Persephone escapes, but because she reigns. The empath does not flee the dark, they claim it. And let us not forget the archetype of the self as the silent center. Jung spoke often of the mandala as the symbol of wholeness. The mandala does not explain itself. It radiates. It does not argue. It embodies. In every sacred circle, in every dream of symmetry, we see the truth. The self is beyond justification. The narcissist cannot touch the mandala, cannot unravel its silence. And when the empath aligns with this inner mandala, their silence becomes luminous, not empty. They do not need to explain, because their very being becomes explanation enough. Their life itself becomes the answer to every demand. Now, imagine a dream where you are in a storm. Winds rage, voices shout, accusations fly like arrows. You feel the urge to scream your truth into the chaos, but in the dream, you suddenly sit, close your eyes, and do not speak. The storm rages around you, but you remain unmoved. And as the dream unfolds, the storm weakens, the voices fade, and silence expands until the storm dissolves entirely. This dream is not fantasy. It is the lived experience of the empath who ceases to explain. The storm of the narcissist cannot survive without fuel. They may rage for a time, but silence starves them. And what remains after the storm is peace. Not the peace of appeasement, but the peace of sovereignty. The narcissist, sensing this, will often escalate. They will accuse more violently, manipulate more subtly, threaten more cruelly. But notice, each escalation is proof of their dependence. They cannot live without your explanations. They need your words as oxygen. When you deprive them, they suffocate. And in their suffocation, they reveal their fragility. This revelation is painful, for part of the empath once believed the narcissist was strong, commanding, superior. To see them crumble is disorienting, but it is necessary, for the truth is always this: their power was illusion. Your explanations were the scaffolding that held their false edifice together. Withdraw them, and the edifice collapses. The empath, in that moment, must resist the temptation to rebuild the scaffolding. For guilt will whisper, compassion will ache. The healer archetype will beg to rescue the collapsing figure, but you must not. Their collapse is not your responsibility. Their hollowness is not your wound to mend. This is the ultimate test: to watch the narcissist unravel and not explain yourself back into the role of savior. If you can endure this, you pass through the final threshold, and on the other side, you discover the truth. The power was always yours. What is left then, after the trial dissolves, after the silence takes root? What becomes of the empath? They are no longer merely empath. They are no longer defined by their sensitivity to others. They become individuated. They become the self in human form. Their sensitivity remains, but it is no longer weaponized against them. It becomes wisdom. It becomes artistry. It becomes presence. They no longer explain, but they still express, and their expression carries a weight, a resonance, a numinous quality that others feel as authority. This is why so many great mystics, healers, and visionaries were once empaths consumed by explanation. They walked through the fire of narcissistic devouring, ceased to explain, and emerged as embodiments of silence. Their words thereafter were few, but they shook worlds. Do you see, then, that this is not merely psychological survival, but spiritual destiny? The empath's journey through narcissistic entanglement is the crucible of individuation. To stop explaining is not merely to protect oneself, it is to awaken, it is to become queen of the underworld, master of silence, bearer of the mandala. It is to embody the self so fully that no projection, no demand, no accusation can uproot you. the narcissist loses power because the archetype has shifted. The empath has ceased to be victim and has become sovereign. And yet, I must warn you, this path is not without grief. For when you stop explaining, some will leave you, some will curse you, some will declare you cold, cruel, arrogant, unloving, and you will grieve because your heart still longs to be seen. But grieve without returning to the trial, for the grief is not proof that you were wrong. The grief is proof that you are shedding an old skin. It is proof that you are birthing yourself anew, and though it hurts, it is holy. For every rebirth requires a death. So let me tell you now, when you feel the urge to explain, pause, place your hand upon your heart, feel the silence that trembles there. Ask yourself, am I explaining to be free or explaining to be bound? If the latter, fall silent. Let the silence burn. Let the silence cleanse. And in that fire, remember, you are not on trial. You never were. When the empath ceases to explain, something even more mysterious unfolds. The psyche begins to realign with archetypal truth, for explanation had kept you orbiting around others, caught in their gravitational pull, like a moon, forever circling a foreign planet. But once silence is chosen, the orbit breaks, and you are pulled back towards the sun of your own self. At first, this feels like disorientation. Where am I? Who am I? What sustains me now that I am no longer defined by their approval? But slowly, the deeper center begins to rise. You feel an energy that does not come from validation, but from within. It is steady, radiant, inexhaustible. And this is the light of individuation. This is the archetypal self calling you home. Do not imagine that this means life becomes effortless. On the contrary, to live without explaining requires constant vigilance. The world will tempt you back into the courtroom. The voices of family, culture, society, even those within your own mind, will demand justification. They will not always appear as narcissists. Sometimes they will appear as lovers, friends, even children. The plea will come softly, help me understand you. And though communication is not wrong, you must discern when the request is genuine dialogue and when it is a disguised trial. If you answer every call with explanation, you return to chains. But if you answer from sovereignty, you preserve your freedom. This discernment is the daily practice of the individuated empath. It is the razor's edge between love and servitude. Let me offer another symbol, the well. Imagine yourself as a well of clear water. The narcissist lowers their bucket endlessly, never to drink, but to drain. You explain, and your water vanishes. But when you stop explaining, the water stops pouring outward. At first, you may fear the well will dry in isolation, but in truth, the opposite occurs. The well fills, the underground springs replenish it, and soon your water overflows not into the devourer's bucket, but into the land itself, nourishing all who come in sincerity. The narcissist bucket is denied, but the world receives a river. This is the paradox. By refusing to explain to those who exploit, you become more capable of giving to those who are ready to receive. And what of love? Many empaths ask, if I stop explaining, will I ever be truly loved? Will anyone ever understand me? The answer is yes, but differently than before. You will not be loved for how well you justify yourself. You will be loved for how wholly you exist. Real love does not require explanation. Real love meets you in silence, in the mystery of being, without demanding endless words. To love and be loved in this way is rare, but it is the only love that heals, and it only becomes possible once you refuse to dilute yourself in the name of acceptance. Explanation seeks conditional love. Silence opens the door to unconditional love. The narcissist then becomes an unlikely teacher. They are the dark initiator, the one who forces you into this crucible. Without their hunger, you might never see your compulsion to explain. Without their devouring, you might never learn the sacred power of silence. This does not excuse their cruelty, nor sanctify their manipulation, but it does reveal the archetypal function they serve. They are the shadow's emissary, pushing you toward individuation by forcing you to confront the futility of justification. And once you pass through, you no longer hate them, you no longer seek vengeance. You see them for what they are, hollow figures pointing you back to yourself. Their power is gone, and in its place remains only a strange gratitude for without the darkness, you would never have discovered your light. Dreams often confirm this. An empath who has stopped explaining will dream of standing before an accuser who suddenly disappears, or of being in a house where doors once locked are now open, or of walking through a forest where voices once mocked but now fall silent. These dreams are not random. They are the psyche's way of affirming the transformation. The unconscious responds to silence by opening new pathways, and through those pathways, deeper symbols emerge: mandalas, radiant suns, rivers flowing through deserts. These are the signs that individuation is unfolding. These are the whispers of the self saying, now you are free. And yet, the journey continues. Individuation is never finished. There will be new trials, new temptations, new shadows. You will face moments where you want to explain again, where fear whispers that silence will cost you everything. Do not despair. Each time you resist, you grow stronger. Each time you choose silence over justification, you deepen your alignment. The path of the self is not perfection, but persistence. You will stumble. You will speak when you should have remained silent, but even then, you will learn. For the moment you taste again the hollowness of wasted explanation, you will remember the truth, and remembering is enough to return you to center. Let me end with a vision. Imagine you are standing on a high mountain at dawn. Below you, the valleys are filled with voices demanding, accusing, begging you to explain. They rise like smoke, reaching for you, pulling you downward. But on the mountain, the air is thin and silent. The sun rises, casting golden light. You realize that you do not need to descend into the valley to prove your existence. You simply need to stand in the light. The mountain does not explain itself. The sun does not justify its rising. They exist, and their existence is enough. So it is with you. Your silence is not emptiness. It is presence. It is radiance. It is a power that no narcissist can touch. And so I say to you, stop explaining. Stop pleading before false judges. Stop pouring your essence into bottomless vessels. Let silence burn away the compulsion. Let grief cleanse the remnants of the old self. Let your light remain with you, not as proof, but as presence. In that silence, you will discover the self. In that silence, you will find that the narcissist has no power, and in that silence, you will be reborn. This is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning. For the moment you stop explaining, you step into a new life. One, not bound by chains, but carried by the current of individuation. And though the world may still demand your words, you now know the secret. Your existence does not require defense. Your soul does not require justification. Your light does not require permission. You are sovereign. You are whole. You are the silent mandala of eternity. And with this, the court dissolves, the storm fades, the book of justifications turns to dust. The self rises, radiant and untouchable, and the narcissist, hungry, hollow, desperate, finds themselves staring into silence. That silence is your freedom. That silence is their undoing. That silence is the eternal truth. You were never bound, except by the illusion that you had to explain. Now you know, and knowing, you are free.